Hello everyone, DarkOfAllTrades here. Today, I'm going to touch on a subject I haven't really delved much into before. That is the idea of the soul. What exactly is a soul? Do we have a soul? What happens to the soul? Luckily, for this video, we're going to look at a channel called One Life Henderson, which put out a video titled, Atheism Can't Be True / an Argument for the Soul. I wonder how this gentleman is going to connect those two ideas.
Whatever's true of the mind must be true of the brain.
Really? I don't think so. I suppose this would depend on what you mean by mind. Cambridge Dictionary describes the mind as, quote, the part of the person that makes it possible for him or her to think, feel emotions, and understand things, end quote. In this case, it could be interpreted to mean the same as the brain. However, in that case, they're just two words that describe the exact same thing. The problem with this is that there are multiple schools of thought on this. The mind-body problem is a philosophical debate concerning the relationship between thought and consciousness in the human mind and the brain as the physical part of the body. There are three major philosophical schools of thought concerning the answer to the problem: dualism, materialism, and idealism. For more on this, look into those three schools specifically. I subscribe to materialism, which, to be almost insultingly brief, explains that the mind is what the brain does. Everything in the brain is effectively done by physical or chemical reactions, and what we refer to as the mind is, in effect, an emergent property of the reactions in the brain. But it seems like this guy is separating the mind and the brain as separate entities, but saying that they are the same thing. This runs dangerously close to an equivocation fallacy. I haven't seen all of this, so I don't know if he will commit it, but it seems like a great setup for it. As for why I think this statement is objectively wrong, the mind is generally considered to be a non-physical entity. We can't physically touch a mind with our hands, definitely not in the same way that we could touch a brain. So if one characteristic of the mind is that it is non-physical, then by this assertion, the brain must also be non-physical. We know the brain is physical, therefore this cannot be true.
In philosophy, this is known as the law of identity.
The law of identity is the first of the three laws of logic. Formally, the law of identity says, each thing is identical with itself. A thing is what it is. A potato is a potato. That means he's equating the brain and the mind as the same thing. This is strange to me, as one can have a brain but not a mind. If you are not alive and all brain function has ceased, you do not have a mind by definition, but your brain can still be 100% whole. We have no examples of a mind without a brain, but we do have examples of a brain without a mind.
We'll put it this way. Suppose you walk into a lab, you see 2 bottles of clear fluid. Based on this law in philosophy, if they're the same substance, whatever is true of one is true of the other.
This is not quite correct. For example, just positioning one bottle to the left of the other bottle could affect some things. Maybe one is in more direct sunlight and therefore is slightly warmer. This means that it could be true that one liquid has a temperature of 70 degrees and the other has a temperature of 72 degrees, which doesn't seem like much, but depending on the other properties could make a big difference. But this could be a bit pedantic, so let me grant this point. 2 bottles have the same substance in them, therefore what is true of one of them is true of the other. Go on.
But let's say one is water and the other one is chemical X, but the label's ripped off. So we think, well, they're both fluids, they're both clear, they must be the same substance.
No, we definitely don't do this, not ever in chemistry. In any sort of laboratory setting, we cannot make these kinds of assumptions. Unless we know that it came from the same source, we would never assume that they are the same fluid. Anywhere we could have the label chemical X, we would never assume what is in it without either knowing the source or testing it. This is a great way to cause laboratory accidents.
Until you turn over chemical X, and it says caution flammable, and you think, well, I know that water's not flammable, which means even if I don't know what chemical X is, at the very least, I know that they cannot be the same thing. Are you with me?
You see, this is why we don't assume. Had we assumed they were the same thing, we could have, at best, messed up our experiment and wasted time and resources, or at worst, caused a horrific accident that cost lives and property. Bleach looks like water, but mix it with any number of things like ammonia, and you create a dangerous mix.
Now, with this in mind, if what my professor is saying is true, then whatever is true of the mind must be true of the brain. But if I can show something true of the brain that's not true of the mind, well, they can't be the same thing. In other words, if atheism is true, I asked an atheist this, would you agree that if atheism is true, non-physical things should not exist?
What? How would those be connected? As much as I don't like this aspect of philosophy, it depends on what you mean by exist. Does mathematics exist? Does philosophy exist? Does chance or emotion or time or beauty or chaos or kindness or courage or theism exist? All of those are non-physical things. If anyone were to try to say that they don't exist, they are either trying to play some sort of solipsistic game or are woefully uneducated on the idea of abstract items. Thoughts may not exist as physical beings, but people have thoughts. It is a label we put on a type of process in the brain. Therefore, thoughts do exist. Atheists can believe in the existence of non-physical things. This is where I'm confused about the connection you're making here. How does the lack of belief in a God pertain to the lack of belief in any non-physical thing?
You said yes.
Then he is an idiot and doesn't speak for me or any other atheist but himself. But I'm sure he is totally real and not made up at all.
I said, okay. But that also means if something non-physical did exist, well, then atheism would be false.
Why? Where is the connection here? I still don't see it. But it looks like his argument is shaping up to be, premise 1, if atheism is true, then non-physical things do not exist. Premise 2, non-physical things exist. Therefore, atheism is not true. This type of argument would be called modus tollens, or denying the consequent. In logical form, it is, if P then Q, not Q, therefore not P. I would agree that this is a valid argument. The structure is such that if I accept the premises, I must accept the conclusion. It would be sound if I agreed with the initial premise. I don't, and I don't know literally any atheist or even a theist who thinks this about atheists. This looks like a mighty fine straw man atheist you got there.
So we can put it this way, if atheism is true, consciousness must be physical, but if consciousness is not physical, well then, again, atheism cannot be true. So the question is consciousness physical?
Technically, no. Consciousness itself is not physical, just like thoughts are not physical, though like thoughts, it is a result of physical/chemical processes. According to cognitive psychologists Jussi Ilkka and Henry Realo in their article from the journal Consciousness and Cognition from September of 2019 titled Consciousness as a Concrete Physical Phenomenon, quote, we take subjective experiences or consciousness to be concrete natural phenomena. If we endorse the physicalistic premise that all concrete natural phenomena are physical, it follows that our experiences are physical phenomena, end quote. A link to this article is in the description. So, according to the version of physicalistic monism they used for that article, consciousness is considered physical. So by your own weird straw man metric, this is not a defeater for atheism.
And the answer is no. Here's why, briefly. Take the mind and brain. Are they the same thing? No, your thoughts are not in your brain, they're in your mind, but your mind uses your brain like a guitarist would use a guitar. The notes of the guitar are not in the guitar. You don't break at the guitar and the notes fall out. Same thing with the mind and brain.
Hang on a minute.
Hang on a minute. But in German, so ein Minuten bitte.
Didn't you just say that the mind and the brain are the same because whatever is true of the mind must be true of the brain because of the law of identity? Now you are going back on that and in fact disproving that whole idea because your thoughts are in your mind and they're not in your brain. The whole video is less than 2.5 minutes and this occurs at the 1.5 minute mark with no cuts or edits. This means he is contradicting his first point less than 1.5 minutes later into his own talk. You wrote this. You didn't have to put either of your first point or this into your talk. Did you not do any editing of your own work?
But let's hear how they're different. My thoughts can be true or false, but my brain isn't true or false. My brain can weigh 3 pounds, but the thought that I'm talking to you right now does not weigh 3 pounds. You may be having heavy thoughts this morning, but you're not going to buy a neck brace when we leave the church. My brain can be 7 inches long, but the smell of a rose or the taste of a banana is not 7 inches long. And there's a lot more I can go through, but the point is simple.
So you do get that whatever is true of the brain is not necessarily true of the mind, and vice versa. I am absolutely baffled at just how fast you demolished your own point. You're better at debunking yourself than your totally real atheist is.
If all the properties of the brain are physical, and all the properties of the mind are non-physical, then consciousness, if it exists, cannot be physical. So, Mr. Atheist, if consciousness exists and can't be physical, and if you have consciously decided to become an atheist, then you shouldn't be an atheist because atheism can't be true.
When did this come into play? I don't accept that anyone consciously decides to become an atheist, or a theist for that matter. One is either convinced by the evidence or is not. However, disproving a bad reason one person is an atheist does not mean that there are not other reasons to be an atheist. Now that you have knocked over that well-built straw man, couldn't someone by your own metric consciously decide to be an atheist for a different reason? Couldn't they consciously decide to be an atheist because thoughts are not physical? If we're setting up arbitrary reasons why someone is an atheist, it can be anything, right? I will grant that no one should be an atheist because they think non-physical things don't exist. I still don't see the connection. And that's it. That's all for the video. I can guess that this was part of a longer talk. I'm guessing the church didn't bring him in to speak for 2.5 minutes, but nowhere in this video was the term soul mentioned. Nowhere in this entire video was the soul hinted at, unless you're equivocating soul and consciousness. Even then, this isn't an argument for the soul at all. This is an argument that one shouldn't be an atheist because non-physical things exist. This was really a baffling video. I am feeling a bit discombobulated by the whiplash of him putting forth an idea and then debunking his own idea. That's it for this video. What did you think? Do you think we have a soul? Do you think that the law of identity means that the mind and the brain are the same thing? Are you into monism, dualism, idealism, or do you subscribe to something else, besides my channel, of course? Do you think One Life Henderson made a good point about why one shouldn't be an atheist? Or do you think that talking down that one reason isn't good enough to convert some skeptics? Let me know in the comments below. As per usual, to prove my like button is my like button, hit my like button. Do you think my subscribe button is a physical thing? Hit it to find out. And as always, keep learning.